That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and today I am joined by Brooks Crenshaw. He's a contributor to the Daily Caller. He also has a Substack you guys should check out called the Daedulus Thread. And I've enjoyed his commentary and also his support too. We follow each other, which is a really nice, thing. There's so many people out there who I follow who I don't think they want to follow me, Brooks, but here we are. So thanks for joining me.
No, great to see you, Lou. Big fan of your work.
Thanks, man. And today I got to let everybody know we are recording this on Election Day, November 5th, 2024. So by the time that this comes out next week, hopefully we'll know who the president of the United States will be and is. So, Brooks, what
nice if it was tonight?
Yeah, what's up with that? I keep hearing about, there's so many countries out there that manage to, get millions and millions of votes in and get them counted, and it's all, cut and dry and right to it. But for some reason, we can't do it. Do you have any insight into what the hell that's about?
I think if those other countries didn't operate properly, we might invade them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the idea of we're sending we'll send people to their elections, to their polls, to keep an eye on things, and we have a very closed door operation here.
Well, we did get English Labor Party representatives to come out and help. So,
oh wow, I didn't know. Yeah. I didn't know that. I voted in New Jersey. I did early voting, which I'd never done before, and I guess the systems vary state to state. So in my state, you had a computer screen. And it was, touch screen. So you touch the candidates that you want to vote for, and then when you look it over, you go like continue, and then it prints something out, and then you feed it into a back into a computer. What's it like in Kentucky, where you vote?
So where I was, we had paper ballots, which I support. I think that's a really good way to do it. I will say there was. When you have paper ballots and they are counted the way that they've always been counted, in a manner that you can actually get to the results that night, that's a benefit. There are some ways that you can kind of manipulate, and one of them is there's a particular amendment on our ballot this year, and it's an amendment to the Constitution in Kentucky to prevent illegal or non-citizens from voting. But the way that the ballot was set up was the question starts, do you vote to amend the Constitution? And then there's all this detail that goes up to the next line above the page before the yes, no, that says that would allow them to vote. So when you see that would allow them to vote, the answer to that question is no. But the actual answer to the question is, if you want that, yes, because you want to amend the Constitution. So there's this, I have a hard time believing that was just happenstance, the way that question was worded, because there were multiple people that I've talked to so far that was like, I wasn't sure whether to answer that question yes or no because of the way that it ended by the yes, no bubble. Yeah.
In my state, they send out, kind of like sample ballots. So if there is, a new bill on the that they're proposing, you get to read it, and hopefully if you don't understand it, you're able to reach out to somebody. But I find it's funny. Here's an amendment talking about whether or not illegal immigrants should be allowed to vote. I wonder how the illegal immigrants voting felt about that. They're like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm not going to disenfranchise myself, sir. Not one bit.
Right.
That's fine. We were talking earlier, you being from Kentucky originally, and I talked about how two of the politicians that I really like are Rand Paul and Thomas Massie in particular. I think Thomas Massie might be my not just like my favorite politician, but also just kind of as a character, and like as a real. If you look at his resume, he doesn't seem like a real person.
Right.
It's
he's very Tony Stark of the holler.
Dude, exactly. So he's, an engineer from MIT. He he lives on his own farm that is off the grid. He literally produces his own electricity, and just all this stuff. And he's really just a really interesting, very intelligent guy. And Matt Kibbe with Free the People. I don't know if you're familiar with Free the People.
Oh,
yeah. They one of their first longer documentaries was basically a biography of Thomas Massie. Like, they went down and interviewed him on his farm. And it was funny because talking with Matt, they did this a few years ago, and it was like one of the first ones that they did, and it's beautifully shot. And it's funny because talking to people who are producing stuff, they're like, oh yeah, we wish we had done this and that, but it came out just like so excellent. It was a really great way to tell his story. So
yeah, he's phenomenal. I couldn't ask for a better congressman.
And it's interesting because you actually have him as a congressman.
Yeah, in fact, funny story. This is all said and done now, so I can kind of talk about it. I was actually approached as a potential primary. I was referred, and because of my military background, I have several friends that are in Congress. I got on a phone call, and they were like, "Yeah, Thomas Massie," and I laughed and I said, "Why would anybody want to run against the best congressman in the body?" So that's how that conversation went.
That's interesting. It's sort of did anybody end up running against him, or did he run unopposed?
They got somebody, and it was really just kind of a shit show from a PR standpoint. It was just kind of a clownish candidate, and Massie was so popular. Like, there was nobody that was gonna. I mean, they spent a lot of money. I know they pledged about 10 million on the candidate, and they're not getting rid of Massie. Massie's too good,
too sassy. Yeah. That Massie,
right?
For sure.
Yeah.
I haven't, I've never been to Kentucky. It's definitely, one of those states that I want to get down to. And I think we have a mutual friend, Wilford Riley.
Oh yeah. Will's a great friend. We actually work out together. So like a couple days a week, put him through the hurt.
Yeah. No, I know he's been looking to drop some pounds and stuff, and to, cause I hear he has a very good trigger finger. And I think he wants the rest of his body to, to be as capable, right?
So we've yet to get to the range. I actually relish that opportunity, but yeah, he's doing great and building some bulk in there and getting aggressive.
Yeah, and it's not bad. He's got he has a best-selling book. That's that's he's making waves, and Will is probably one of the best follows that I have on Twitter, X, if you will. His insights are great, and he actually pushed me towards some of the work that you've been doing, and we'll talk about that. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about is your military background. You were in particular, you were an intel guy for the SEAL teams. What does that? Yeah, what does that mean?
So my particular role, I was a human intelligence / targeting guy. So always have to differentiate. I was not a SEAL. I was embedded in the team. My MO was to get into a unit that was so far away from the flagpole with so few guys that we could actually get something done, because the military is less bureaucratic, I would say, than the rest of the federal government, but like it's still impossible to get anything done unless you're this steely, wiry crew of guys who know how to get around the bureaucracy, which we thankfully were. So my role essentially was to identify the key targets that we should be going after, and then getting about the business of geolocating them in such a way that, okay, I've got intel that the number 2 is going to be in this compound in the next 12 hours. And I've got multiple triggers that are going to confirm that. And we're going to be, boots on the ground X hours. So that was a drug. Like really, when Jordan Peterson talks about the fact that we're meant to carry weight in a pack, sort of metaphorically speaking, I experienced that firsthand, because like all of the SEALs that we lost in combat, at some point bad intelligence was a factor in that failure. So if I failed at my job bad enough, not only might I die, but so could my friends. And at that point, they would write a book about it. They would make a movie about it. And it would be this cultural thing. So like Jupiter level gravity with regard to the weight that I was carrying on my shoulders. Couple that with the fact that a couple years later, I'm a college student and nothing I do matters whatsoever. So like there's a 3 to 4 year process in my life that was just really a shit show to like try to get through that and figure out how to eventually replace that weight in the pack. So yeah, that's essentially what my job was. It was really
how old are you now, and how long ago were you doing that?
I'm currently 48. I joined at 26. I joined right after 9/11. So 9/11 had happened. I joined in January. Ended up deploying 4 times, mostly Iraq, some Afghanistan, and so I was already somewhat of a libertarian in service, like, but I did view the fact that I was, my generation was called, we were attacked, I'll do the thing. That shortly turned into the Iraqi thing, which that's a whole other podcast. But
Sure.
My intention was never to be a career guy. Like, nothing against career guys. I know and love a lot of them, but like, I just wanted to do the thing, come back home, live an American life. And so that's pretty much what my military service looked like. But it was instructional in being the government gun that is implicit in all law. Like, most people don't even understand that it's there, but lethal force backs all policy, domestic and otherwise. So like, that's something that I really try to draw attention to by people who haven't had to point guns at people's face over U.S. policy.
And when you joined the military, the service, did you do it through the Navy, or were you?
That's right. Yeah.
So it was like the Navy. That is that the normal track where people go to either work with the SEALs or to become a SEAL? Is it naval?
Yeah. So what happened after 9/11? It's interesting. A large contingent of people who would have otherwise, were they to join the military, would have gone officer, and done other potential MOSs. When doing the research after 9/11, it's like, what's the fastest route to the fight? And the fastest route to the fight to be an operator was to join the Navy as an enlisted guy, go through BUDS. But the thing about it is, after 9/11, you had like these guys that were enlisted, that one friend of mine was speaking Mandarin as a dive instructor, white kid from Ohio, joined the military after 9/11, knew that going to BUDS and being a SEAL was the fastest way. So he did that, but he shattered his femur. He broke his femur bad during rock partage, which is an evolution in BUDS, which is SEAL training. And so they medically discharged him. But when the Navy or when the military medically discharges you, they have to fix you first and then release you. So he had like almost 2 years of rehab and everything while he was still wearing a uniform so they could fix him. In that time, he learned Pashto and Dari, the 2 languages of Afghanistan, and immediately got recruited as a civilian for the army, doing some pretty sexy stuff after the fact. So like, you had this interesting eclectic group of really top performers that just happened to be enlisted Navy because they all knew it was the fastest way in. And that's not the way they would have normally joined the military had they chosen to do so.
Yeah. And so you made it clear at the beginning that you were not a SEAL, which I've gone down so many rabbit holes. One of my favorite things on YouTube are stolen valor videos.
Yes.
Where dudes pretend that they're out of all the things you could pretend, they pretend that they're SEALs. And one of the questions they always, that's always asked is, well, what's your class? And they're like, it's confidential or something like that, which is complete, which I've learned is complete bullshit. It's like, no, it's not classified. You'll know what the class is. So for you, did you like do buds and try to become a SEAL? Or?
Yeah, so I joined to go that track. I was in class 243. I washed out, and there is something that I didn't anticipate. I knew it was going to be cold. I knew it was going to be a kick in the dick, and I was able to handle all that, as well as you can. I ended up in a position where I was the weakest link of a team of 6 guys who were fresh, and I was dragging them down. Like they were going to suffer because I sucked, and I wasn't prepared to be in that position. And so in that moment, I was like, I can't hold these guys back, and went away. So like, that was my greatest failure, I would say in my life. Actually, it was a catastrophic failure, because like, I'd been a performer in multiple disciplines. It's funny. I see your background, and I kind of see, what you do. And I started in the theater.
Really?
And yeah, it's a long story. I was in a performing arts school in the New York school kind of network. And knew very quickly that I went to Nashville I was a roadie for a while, and realized that was not the course for me. And learned a lot of really cool things in the adventure of going to Nashville that were non-musical. But, I had been a performer in multiple disciplines and been good at those things. When I got to this thing and failed it, it was catastrophic to me. But I had an option after a period of service to either go back and go through again, which many guys I deployed with had gone 2 and 3 times to get through. I served with guys that were in my class and left before me, that came back and were that. In my case, I knew the into of the, you would call the intelligence officer for the West Coast SEAL teams. And I said, hey, look, I'm 30. Things are hurting the way they haven't before when I'm training to do this again. In terms of risk reward, I knew 4 guys that went through and had such catastrophic injuries, they were out of the game. So, in terms of risk reward, I decided, what, I'm going to go the intel route. And it turns out, man, if I'd have known that job existed beforehand, that's what I would have gravitated to anyway, because it's the why. There are operators that I worked with that really love the intel side. They were curious about who and why we're taking out. But then there are operators that are just, show me the door, I don't give a shit. Like, and so that position was really kind of tailor made for me. In that moment, you get guys that fail and are bitter about it. And I knew in those moments, what I tried to do was think about what would a person I really admired do in this position? Or what is a story that I could lean on that tells me the way to be? And I kind of lean on old story as a series of frameworks for how to be. And in this case, Little John was the right answer. It's like, okay, Robin Hood, Little John come to the pass. They fight on the bridge. Little John's on his ass. Robin Hood wins. And Little John says, okay, man, I'm your number 2 from here on out. Like, I got you back. And so that was the right answer. It was like, I'm going to be the best intel guy you guys have ever had. I'm not the shooter. Like, you guys are it. But like, we're going to do some amazing shit together, because I've got this passion for finding the bad guy, and we're going to do it well. So I was able to turn that failure into a really great series of relationships with, I got to work with my heroes, like just giants. I felt like one of the little hobbits on the journey with the big warriors, right? It was that kind of dynamic, because like it was still quite an adventure.
Well, that's, what you just said, I think is really insightful on a number of levels, because I think as a civilian, when I hear, Navy SEALs, I think of almost indomitable men, men who can't lose. But the reality is, no, Navy SEALs go off to war. Navy SEAls die. Navy SEAls are killed in battle for all sorts of reasons. and then also it's like getting to that point, and the people, like you described yourself, you said you washed out on that, and being able to see that failure, but also to grow from it, and then to end up being perhaps a stronger team member in this new role than you could have been.
Right.
And the fact that, I mean, when you said, you were 30 trying to do this, like, what was like the average age of most of the guys you were?
Most of the guys going in were in their early 20s. I was an old guy at 26 going through. But I also found that the older guys that made it were better once they got in, because they were already more mature. Like you get a 22-year-old with a trident, man. Like that's a dangerous fucking, that's a dangerous proposition. So like the command has to like really, get the young guys and cultivate them into, whereas, the older guys have already kind of had some iterations to mature. And so they're kind of prepackaged mature in certain aspects. So, yeah, I served essentially through my late 20s to my late 30s.
Yeah. And with, with that, having that information, that intelligence, I mean, one of the things when you were describing, being in intelligence, I was like, man, could I keep that secret? Like, could I keep could I not, blab about this stuff? Because I think that there was a controversy, I guess, when Osama bin Laden was taken out about, who's gonna, I guess, spill the beans first and who's gonna take
the
credit.
Rob Riggle sketch, man, like that shit went around. So like that was the most hilarious. You familiar with that?
I know Rob Riggle. I don't know if I've seen the sketch before.
Rob, like there's a sketch out there. I forget who did it. I think it was Funny or Die. Yeah, it was Funny or Die. And Riggle's essentially in this dark command room where he's the guy that's taken out bin Laden, got the trident on, and this admiral comes up and pins the medal on him and says, now son, you can never tell anybody about this. And then smash cut to him at the bar, like, I fucking killed bin Laden. Like, and it's funny, like that's kind of how that situation teased out in the final analysis. But it was a hilarious sketch.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And like, you're somebody who, you do commentary on what's going on. You're also, an academic, and you do writing. Where is the line as far as, stuff that you're allowed to talk about and stuff that you're, not allowed to talk about?
I'll tell you, Lou, most of my experience is so stale, it wouldn't really be of that much interest. And most of my experience was with a group of guys that were so good at their job. I mean, what we were doing was direct action, like middle of the night operations, where it was detaining more than killing, and only the latter if things went south. And like, I was blessed in every deployment to be with a group of guys that when we went after a guy and he was home, everybody came back alive and we got the guy too. Not that was always great. There were times that I wish they would have schwacked him, because like there's this whole bureaucracy with regard to detention. But things are what they are. So yeah, I wouldn't say that experience is that interesting anymore. Well, I never know. I tend to think that everything else that I've been working on, and I have worked to not get typecast. I'll put it that way, because when I first got out, I was doing security with former SEALs, and we were doing that thing, and it was low hanging fruit for what I could do. But I was at a place in life where I realized that if I keep going down this road, these are my only options, and I'm going to be taking the bullet for the guy instead of potentially being the guy who has people who take the bullet for him. And who do you want to be ultimately? And I think, where I kind of turned the corner was, I like what I have done. I still do some of it. I've done some consulting in recent years for DoD and DHS on technology acquisition. And in that role, I'm kind of a Ron Swanson figure, in that, I'm helping the people in the federal government that I still have some faith in with regard to being law enforcement, that are really just trying to get the bad guy, not the, DC Beltway types. But in all of my analysis, I'm able to get on record in my reports that say, hey, this technology is great. Here are the Fourth Amendment concerns, and get on record about, the potential domestic use of any of it. That if I weren't there, some soulless fuck would, not even contemplate that thing. So like, I think there's a time and a place for that. I think about Rand's magnum opus, and Hank Rearden had A Man in Washington in the beginning of the book. So, even from Rand's perspective, it's reasonable to have that chess piece on the board until it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was in college. It was my sophomore year when 9/11 happened, and I remember, being caught up in, kind of the patriotism of, of being attacked. And I didn't serve, but I remember it seemed like it was such a quick turnaround between going into Afghanistan and then Iraq. It was just like such a quick thing. And I remember at the end, looking back, I'm a 20-year-old kid, and even then I was just saying, like, what are we doing in Iraq? Like, why is this happening? So at the time, I guess being, kind of, anti-war, if that was going to be the umbrella that I was under. Years later, I met, I was dating a girl who went to college with a guy who ended up being an officer, I guess, in the Marines. And he was a Harvard grad. He went to the London School of Economics. A lot of his fellow Marines were kind of like, Marines don't do that shit. Like, Marines are fighting, and he's a really special guy. And then being able to talking to him and him, telling me about his experience and stuff, I was like, oh man, I'm really happy this guy is serving over there. This guy who really cares about what he's doing, is doing it for, I think, very noble reasons. And I think a lot of people forget about that, like, even with law enforcement too. It's like, and we often find it on the, the libertarian side. It's like, kind of all cops are bastards light, you might want to call it. And it's like, but they're there, and you want to make sure you have the best people working on the job that you possibly could find,
Yeah, something like that. And there are some guys I worked with that, we lost, that were, I mean, dude, just amazing human beings on a lot of fronts. And so, like, my best friend was killed in the Fob Chapman double cross in the agency compound in December 30th, 2009. And Jeremy had this amazing potential. He could have been a surgeon. He could have been a West Point grad. Instead, he went to Buds, got through, became a SEAL, and would have gone on to be this amazing contributor to society. And processing that loss at the same time as I was getting out of the military and feeling that emptiness of having carried the pack and not having it anymore, really put me through I became a very bitter, I really took on the spirit of Cain, so to speak, from the story standpoint. And coming out the back end of it, I realized that cynicism and bitterness is only the halfway point in the journey. And like, if you're going to complete that journey, which I don't think that's the norm. But the completion of that journey looks like when Peterson talks about, accepting the suffering of life voluntarily and walking up out of the ditch and taking your cross and not being naive anymore, but acting in a way that is of service in spite of knowing what is out there that can take advantage of you and take you out. And I think that's the right way to be. But with regard to the loss of Jeremy's potential, like, I view that as almost a debt that I owe, because I lived. And so, like, I have this aim that I'm trying to not only outpace my own potential, but take some of him. And that's that's a fool's errand, right? But like, it's a proper point of orientation, because even if you aim at it and miss, the outcome is better than had you not aimed for it. And so, like, my interest is in really cultivating individual human potential in my network at scale. And that's a way that you really can make up for that lost potential in terms of a ledger so to speak. And so that's really what I've been working on. And I think one of the things that I think really informs that is kind of the old story narratives. I think Peterson's done a really good job on kind of exploring that, as well as like Joseph Campbell as well. So like I'm kind of doing writing in that field, but I'm following giants. But I have my own unique perspective that informs that. You know, I spent roughly 10 years of kind of autodidactically studying theology at a very deep level. I don't have the same beliefs that I did going in. I don't really entertain the literal questions anymore. I don't think those are the important questions. I think the important questions are the deeper how to be questions in a given context. And I think story is as useful a framework as you can use, because it, well, I mean, think about it this way. If I was trying to instruct you, Lou, on how to be in a given context that is best for you, both across time and for your family and for your friend network and for your outer network, both now and across time, I could do it in a flow chart or a Bayesian decision tree, but like that's not intuitive. But a story serves that purpose in a very deep level, and the characters in a story are really an avatar that you are following down a course so that you don't have to suffer the consequences that they do.
Yeah, and with that, just to jump in, it's that story element, that really does it, because as you're speaking, as you're talking about your friend, your person who you served with, like I have no idea what that is. I have friends of mine who've passed away way too young, and their loss impacts me. I have coming up on like maybe the 3-year anniversary of a young friend of mine who passed away. But it's like there's a disconnect between I'm a civilian, you're a soldier, and you're telling these stories about war and loss and service that I'm very limited in what I can get from that. But that story is stuff. I can take elements of that story in the same way that you bring up like Joseph Campbell, people watching Star Wars. Nobody's a Jedi. Nobody's Luke Skywalker. Those things are complete fantasy. And yet, from those elements, where I'm able to glean things and say, "Oh, this is where I'm kind of the hero's journey. Here's where I'm on my own little hero's journey."
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I was going to say with Peterson, I'm glad you brought him up, and I was a big fan of Peterson, kind of early on when he sort of first came up. Not saying I'm not a fan now. It's wild. He's been around for like so long, and I haven't been really following him in recent years. But I remember you talk about bearing bearing a cross, and I think one of the things that struck Peterson down in this time when he was very much down is that he was basically trying to be a Christ-like figure. I think he was taking on way too much weight. And it's like, no, you're a mortal man, and
Marcus Aurelius had a servant that would follow him around saying, "You are mortal, you are mortal."
And I feel like it was like it was all this stuff that he was taking on, whether it was his his celebrity stature, people coming to him for asking him questions on every single thing. What's the meaning of life? Then the health situation of his wife, and I felt like with man, you do take on these burdens, but there is a reality of just how much of a load you can actually take. And I think, and I hope that he's, come out of that, stronger and he doesn't go down that road again.
I think those things are iterative. I think even the hero stumbles, and Chappelle's got that line, "When the hero stumbles, the coward rejoices," and that's certainly true, given all the commentary around that especially with the benzos and dealing with all that stuff. But I think the guy really has done a lot, in particular to provide the right insight toward motivation, toward your individual potential. I really believe that people act as you treat them in a sense. I don't think you can turn everybody into Rhodes Scholars, but I do think that if you treat them honestly and are transparent in giving them as much of the information as possible while treating them like adults, they potentially act in a better fashion. And that kind of comes to the madness of crowds versus the wisdom of the crowd. Like both of these things are real. The question is, how are we going to navigate problems in such a way that as a culture or society that we get the former and not the latter?
Yeah. Well, your Substack is the Daedulus Thread, and for those who, and correct me if I'm wrong, Daedalus is father of Icarus, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And he, talk about fuck ups.
Right.
He made these wings for his son so they could fly and escape the labyrinth, and they were made of wax. And I don't know if it's dad's fault or the kid's fault, a little bit of both. But flying too close to the sun, Icarus, fell.
That story. I always growing up, I heard that Icarus was not supposed to fly too close to the sun, and he did it anyway. And then, of course, the ubiquitous Led Zeppelin T-shirt that was all over the high school, and so like you had this image of a fallen Icarus. But the actual story is he had to navigate between the waves and the sun. So like there were actually guardrails in the story. There was properly navigating, properly threading the needle, so to speak, and that's really insightful because this is kind of the Goldilocks Three Bears notion that when you move into a certain direction and find a pathological end, the notion that simply moving away from it in the opposite direction ad infinitum will have this linear relationship to good, and that's not the case. You will inevitably find an opposing pathology. So when somebody sells you a solution to this problem that goes in this direction, but they don't mention what you'll run into if you keep going in that direction, like you need to figure what that is, because all of this is elegantly threading the needle between two pathological guardrails.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about all the iconography of Icarus. You brought up Led Zeppelin, and I'm thinking of who was it? It's not Pliny Pliny the Younger, who I think there's a painting called the Fall of Icarus, and it's like this big painting, and he's just a little wave. It's kind of, I think his leg is sticking out, and that was used. Oh my God! Now I'm like, W.H. Auden had a poem about it, and like it's one of the lines is sort of like a dog barks. Sort of this idea of like, all this stuff is, this monumental fall happens and a dog barks, and it's sort of, I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a cynical look at the events, but I don't know.
Well, so the reason that I've named it the Daedalus, there's a deep story back there, and it's really the story of Minos and the Minotaur, the labyrinth and the Minotaur. Joseph Campbell did a really good analysis on the story, and what Campbell does is he explores the reason that these stories are so sticky, the reason they stay in our psyche, and they last through time. And so Minos was the king of Crete, and he was given a sacred white bull from Poseidon, but there was an expectation he was going to sacrifice that bull publicly to find favor with Poseidon for his people. But instead, in that moment, he succumbed to temptation and switched one of his own white bulls for the sacrifice and kept that sacred white bull for himself. So Poseidon, in revenge, gave his wife Pasiphaë an insatiable desire, lust for this bull. And so she talked to Daedalus into making a cow effigy that she could crawl into and seduce the bull. Bada bing, bada boom. She becomes pregnant, and out comes the Minotaur, which is part Minos, part Taurus. And so Campbell's analysis of this is that Minos was not acting as a citizen; he was acting as a king. And when he switched the bulls, he was abusing his public office. And the Minotaur was the evidence of that public office, and that evidence was hidden in a labyrinth. And so Daedalus was called again to make this labyrinth around the Minotaur. And the Minotaur was fed by taking tributes from out of the kingdom to feed to the Minotaur. So what the abuse of public office and the hiding of that evidence, like the way that manifests in our modern world, is that labyrinth is the bureaucracy. And the abuse of public office is hidden within the walls of that bureaucracy. And we are essentially robbed at gunpoint to subsist that labyrinth. And the way to navigate that labyrinth, as Theseus did, was Daedalus provided him with the skein of thread. And the thread was attached to the entrance of the labyrinth so that he could navigate the labyrinth based on where he had been before. And so the way to navigate that labyrinth to address the abuse of public office and the evidence of it is to be in connection with where you have been before. That's being in connection with your past. It's the antithesis of being naive. I don't fall for 3-card money because I've been here before. I know what the trick is. And that's the reason that Mao Zedong wanted to kill the 4 olds and cut things off, and why Pol Pot wanted to start at year 0, and why Kamala Harris says what could be unburdened by what has been. It's an attempt to sever our connection to our past that informs us what kind of fuckery lays ahead of us if we don't have a wits about us.
Oh, that's really interesting. And something else that it just seems like an ongoing theme. It's like, here are these mortals who think they're going to fool the gods, who think they're going to, you're going to get one over on this guy. And it's like, no, in the end, your wife is going to get screwed by a bull. It's, it's so way. That's awesome. Talking to you about this makes me want to, read mythology again. I was really lucky to just thinking about even just like the little bit of experience I had in school reading Ovid, reading. I didn't have to read the Iliad in college. I read the Odyssey, and it's sort of like these like sure, you have the opportunity to to open a book and read this stuff, but really, when are you going to make the time to read it? And having that that connection to the past, especially stuff these days, stories that are so sticky that there's a reason why they stand the test of time. With the you have a post on your Substack I'm looking to dive into, and it's basically like, what do we mean when we say communism? Right. And since you mentioned Mao and Pol Pot and perhaps our first Madam President. What do you mean when you use communism?
Yeah, so I would say that when we say woke, that moniker is describing really, for lack of a better analogy, a virus. Like, that's exactly, and this isn't mine. This isn't my analogy. This is in their own literature. There's a paper called Women's Studies as a Virus. And it essentially, when you divorce any value judgment at all and only focus on operational success, which is really what the kind of neo-Marxists, informed by some postmodernist ingredients, have sought to do, it really acts just like a virus. So, one of the things that they do very well is kind of avoid being identified from a title standpoint, from a caste standpoint. And when you say communism, what most people think about is Soviet economic communism based on vulgar Marxism, the purely economic Marxism. And in that article, what I do is draw a comparison to the fact that the same H1N1 flu that was responsible for the Spanish flu is the same virus that was the swine flu in 2009. From one level of analysis, you could make the claim correctly that those two viruses are the same thing. But from another level of analysis, you can see that they're distinctly different. And so what happens here is kind of a Mott Bailey of, well, it's not the same thing. Well, it's not the same thing, but it is at the right level. And so what has transpired since the Soviet era was Mao's cultural revolution, and a lot of the cultural Marxism that was in fashion in that era. It continued to evolve, and it evolved in the American experiment. In the late 60s, you had a serious communist revolutionary presence. They ultimately saw Nixon's popularity as insurmountable. And so, Herbert Marcuse, Rudi Dutschke, basically they had this mirror strategy that mirrored Mao's retreat into the mountains, the Long March. And so Mao, during the Civil War, was up against a superior force. So they retreated into the mountains where they could defend their position and amass a much larger force that they could march their opponents into the sea, which they ultimately did. And so Marcuse's idea was we can do that metaphorically by embedding ourselves in the universities and the classrooms. And in doing so, we can kind of hide out, lay low, but also continually pump this shit into the heads of successive generations, to the point where, for a long time, we all said, oh yeah, they're in university, but one day they're going to get a job and see what the real world's like, and they'll get that out of their system. And that worked up until a critical mass, to the point where all the HR departments were run by that particular doctrine. And so what you ended up with was an American style series of political commissars. I mean, the DEI officer in the company, in the corporation, in any university, that function as a role is identical to the cultural Maoist political commissars that ensure that the right flags are being displayed, the right party thought and speech is being enforced in the organization. It's the same thing. It's just Americanized, because we wouldn't adhere to a Chinese Maoist way of doing it, but the way that we're doing it with the rainbow flags and the BLMs and the whatnots, it's the same thing. It's just something acceptable to many Americans. So it works.
Yeah. I'm always surprised when I see, well, I shouldn't be surprised, is because, I saw a guy, somebody, they were a trans Maoist. So they had the the hammer and sickle, and then they had the trans flag, and they were a trans Maoist.
Right.
And I was just wondering which of the four olds were eliminated to make room for the transgender, Maoists. It's just, so I mean, just even thinking about how, communists like, Lenin and described homosexuality. Like homosexuality was like a bougie thing, homosexuality was an outgrowth of capitalism, right. and like they're on record talking about this stuff, and like somehow, in the year 2024, you have members of that community, of that sexual identity, who think that, it would be great if we were back in Stalin's Russia. I mean, we would be treated so well,
Well, it's interesting, this cobbled together mass of LGB and TQ. I'm noticing a lot of LGBs that are kind of breaking off and saying, hey, look, I was part of this movement because I want to be left alone. I want to be able to join my property with my significant other and be left alone. I'm not about this thing that you're trying to do with regard to, and really queer theory isn't describing homosexuality in that context. Queer is describing, they call it identity without essence, but really all it means is if it's normal, break it. You're introducing things in opposition to social norms. And so the whole point is to break any and all social norms. And that's where there's some confusion, because people hear queer and they think, because of the epithet historically, that is an LGB thing. Queer is the first step on your Marxist journey as one of those three things. That's what queer actually means. And so there are LGBs that are pushing back, and I really support the movement of the LGBs that want to split off from that, because ultimately the TQ, the T is the battering ram that the Q is using to bash all social norms, from locker rooms to women's sports, etc. Like that's the functional aspect of it.
Well, even within the Q, the Q question, I guess, would be the QQ. One of the things that I keep seeing people who are clearly straight, like describing themselves as queer, and it's like, it's like, oh, I'm a 30-year-old self-identifying woman who's in a relationship with my partner who's a non-binary, but it's like, no, you're a woman and you're with a guy, and you're in like a straight relationship. You've never eaten pussy before. You're not actually queer. But there's, I don't know if there's like a cachet to being queer,
Well, it's when you talk about that, there's this incentive structure. Incentive structure is everything, right? So when you take the notion of white supremacy and the fact that white racism is inherent, like it's an original sin. If you're a straight white in corporate parlance or in university or whatever context, there's this carrot that's right there, and all you got to do is say non-binary and you're absolved. It's essentially taking the Eucharist for this woke religion. It's essentially walking down the aisle and accepting Christ, but in a new woke religion. And say what you want about Judeo-Christian ethic, it's had 2,000 years to mellow. And what really,
that's a good way to put it. Yeah, no.
Well, so the thing is, we're all religious. We all have a religious circuit. And when I say religious, I don't mean Baptist or Catholic or Islamic mosque or Mormon tabernacle. What I mean is the word religion. We get the word rely and reliance from the same root that we do religion. And essentially what it means is to bind yourself to something or to rely on something in the absence of certainty. So we navigate this reality with a lot of uncertainty. We have to rely on assumptions that may or may not be true. And that's really the root of what religion is. And so in the absence of a Judeo-Christian narrative, you have this neo-Marxist narrative that's ready to take its place. And it's very young, which means it's very conquest oriented and very violent, which is kind of the human. I mean, the Christians certainly did their share of that, mostly because it was the state, not necessarily the church, but like that's human fuckery in institutions. Yeah.
I think the one, on the bright side, this is something our friend Will Riley pointed out a few days ago. He basically said, I forget who he was responding to on X, and he's like, look, he's like, let's just be real. He's like, you can't fight. He's like, and it's like, if you try something, you're gonna get fucked up. And in a way, like, and not saying I don't, I'm not trying to put myself out there as a tough guy, but I know that there are men who are very capable of violence, who I'm very happy agree with me on a lot of these things than, people who, want to, quote unquote, queer everything,
And what I found, and what you've probably found too, with the people that are particularly good at violence, and Peterson's talked about this, and he's right. When you get good at a martial art, and a pistol rifle is still martial art. When you get good at those things, you typically become much more controlled in your use of those things. And so like when the notion of the Sermon on the Mount, the meek shall inherit the earth, that word meek in English kind of has this weak namby-pamby notion, but what it actually means is someone who's mastered the sword, but will keep it sheathed. And like, that's true. Because I know many men and I myself at some level capable of violence, but also able to maintain, because when you're capable, you don't have to go off the rails. You can use your systems and processes to navigate a peaceful end, hopefully, but like that's kind of baked into being competent at violence and in general.
You got a little bit of the Kelsey look, the football players, guys. You could be one of their. You could be a brother, I think.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, yeah. How tall are you? How big are you? You?
Oh no, man! Like I'm wide. I'm wide. Not tall. Yeah, I was turned under. I'm like 5'11" and a half, which is 5'11".
Still taller than me, Brooks. You got me by an inch, man.
Sorry.
No, because I recently it was the other day. There was one of the brothers. I think there are two of them. One plays for the Chiefs. The other played for the Eagles. And I think it was the brother who played for the Eagles was like walking, and he was surrounded by some fans, and then other just people being jerks. And a guy yelled at him like, how does it feel that your brother's a faggot or something like that? And he had the kid had his phone. How does it feel that your brother's a faggot? And the Kelsey guy took the guy's phone and broke it, and then said like, who's a faggot now or something. I forget, if I'm not getting the dialogue perfectly, but I was just saying like, look, the only time you're supposed to talk shit to men who can destroy you is when they're on the other side of a screen, computer screen. Not when they're literally on the other side of your screen on the phone. And it's just like, I see just so many instances of this where I'm like, dude, why? In what world are you stepping into to another man like that without it, and not expecting things to go wrong? Always expecting things to go in your favor. Insane.
Well, we've been, again, it's the problem of abundance that, when the incoming generation takes for granted the fact that meat comes from the store and shelves are stocked and trains run on time, without understanding that that's a fucking miracle, and the fact that every male isn't tested in battle and the weak one's dead quick, like that's the reality that we've come from, and without proper appreciation of that, we go back to it.
Yeah. The other day, Sunday, I brought my 4-year-old. It was like just me and him for the day. We went to my parents, and my mom just turned 78. My dad 75, and my dad, he's a butcher. And back when he had first kind of started his own butcher shop, he had a terrible accident where he cut off his pinky.
Ooh,
right.
So
he cut it off. And it was, I don't know, I think it was hanging.
Was it bandsaw?
No, I don't think it was a bandsaw. I think it was, he was cutting chuck, I think. Chuck, I think if it was a bandsaw, it probably would have just been, gone. Yeah. So he had a terrible experience of getting that thing reattached. This was like in the 80s. I don't know, it was maybe 86 or something like that. And, he was given two choices. He was like, if his pinky was to be reattached straight, he wouldn't be able to move it. And then these other fingers would be straight. So my dad would basically have like a kung fu grip. But then the doctor told him, if we attach it and it's bent, at least you could hold the knife. You could hold the knife, you could hold the cleaver. And my dad actually brought in a cleaver when they were, doing it. So he could hold it, right? So I bring that up because my son was like attracted to my dad's hand, and they were playing around, like trying to like straighten the pinky, and he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And my dad didn't go into details about the story because, my son's, 4 years old. But I asked my dad, how old were you when that happened? And my dad was 37 when it happened, and I'm 42.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, my God, 5 years ago, I would be in the same age as my dad. And the idea that I would have, chopped my finger, cut my finger off and put myself and my family in a situation where I don't know when I can get back to work. I just started this new business and all that. How am I going to build myself out of it? And it was like, wow, my dad in many senses is, a warrior,
right.
Like someone who's able to, to get over that and to walk with that wound for the rest of his life, the rest of his days,
to adapt, to provide for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I never knew the part of where he literally brought in a knife to the, to the hospital, to the surgeon, so he could fashion his new hand, I guess, in that. Brooks, one thing I wanted to talk about. So a while ago, sorry, I keep getting a lot of spam calls. I know you work in technology. If there's anything you could do to like send like a shock or something to just take out all these people, friggin' spammers. That'd be amazing.
I don't know things as much as I know people in that regard.
So one of the things we were going to talk about was Patriot Front. And for those of you who don't know, so I produced a video with Matt Kibbe's Free the People. It's basically, the truth about Patriot Front. And the joke is it's basically a casting call about, casting the actors who are behind Patriot Front. And I was really happy with the video, and I think it resonated with you. And I was, I wanted to talk to you about if you had any insights into that.
First of all, the video is hilarious because, I studied at NYU, and it's just like you can see like the theater geek culture, embedded in the sketch, which you certainly probably are in some form connected to, which I really appreciate. And but the notion of the Patriot Front, and the jokes are all around. It's like Rogan's got a bit. Where's the fat guys? Right? Like, I don't know if you know this, but I just voted today in rural Kentucky, and there's a sub profile there that's missing from that particular group. And my take on that is really, we all kind of infer this top down psyop, single united front to put this thing out here that's not really true, and it's meant to sway public opinion. And I think ultimately that there's some truth to that, but like, it happens in ways that the average person who's never navigated like the bureaucracy of state, there are a lot of incentive structures there, like with regard to the governor of Michigan, the kidnapping, Gretchen Whitmer, that case. Like, you had 18 CIs and agents and 2 guys that were like, we don't like her, but we shouldn't kidnap her. Like, are you in or out? Right? Like, that whole thing. and like, is it complete and total entrapment? But like, what drives some of that, and I'll give you an example, is dual incentives. And so I'll give you a quick story. In Nashville in the late 90s, early 2000s, the state legislature changed the law and made it a felony to modify temporary tags. So like, if your temporary tag with a marker says 06/12/22 and you change it to 08/12/22, now that's a felony. Wow. So immediately what the leadership of the Nashville Metro Police Department did was, every precinct, every shift meeting, the lieutenants and the sergeants are like, we need more of these arrests. We need more of these arrests. And all my friends that had gone in, and these were like knock around guys that are looking for murders and rapists, and like, they're not ticket writers, are furious because like, they're really good arrests, or like, yeah, that's really good, but we need more of these temporary tag arrests. And the guys were like, fuck, this is bullshit. But what really made that manifest was the fact that the chief of police and the leadership are incentivized to reduce threats to officer safety while increasing potential felony arrests. So you got these 2 guardrails within their incentive structure. So, officer safety on the one hand and felony arrests on the other. So our domestic intelligence functions have gotten very mature with regard to their CI networks and capabilities, because like, it's not like we're in Iraq where I go for 6 months at a time. I don't speak the language. I don't own the streets necessarily. There are all kinds of reinventing the wheel when you have deployments and reliefs. But when you're talking about domestic law enforcement and domestic intelligence, like, they go home at the end of the day, they come back to work the next day, they speak the language, they know the people, they know the roads as well as the people that they're hunting. And so these structures mature to a point of, to a point to where those incentives manifest in such a way that you can do a Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping operation that may as well be a training scenario because it's so controlled, but you get these 2 felony arrests at the end of it. So like, you can open the doors and let these geriatrics walk into the Capitol in between the ropes and looking around like tourists, and at the end of the day, you've got all these felony arrests and no real officer safety issues. Now, the thing is, they knew to make the narrative that like 6 officers were killed. So like, you have to put that out there, and they put it out there for a day and then slow walked the fact that none of that was true. But the people in the population that they were trying to convince were already convinced, because they don't do any secondary digging. They hear the headline and it's done its job. And so that's why they slow walk all that stuff. So, yeah, I think there's probably some rogue elements in law enforcement agencies that are doing some of this stuff for the intended purpose that we think. But there are also these incentives of, if we do this thing, we'll have total control of it. We got 4 people here that we'll arrest, but like, we run the whole thing. It's really safe. Officer safety is taken care of. Felony arrests are taken care of. We get our promotions, and et cetera. So like, those are the bureaucratic navigation of incentives that actually take place behind the scenes that kind of inform how those things play out. And it's a little more intricate than, Spectre and James Bond, which, by the way, that was a wonderful cue. That was a great video. Hilarious.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah. Is it Al-Qaeda? Is it Russia? Is it China? No, it's Dickhole69 on Twitter. Perfect. Yeah.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And like I said, we're recording this on Election Day. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm happy that Brooks Crenshaw is here, and he'll be sticking around and get more of his work out there. So appreciate it, man.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.